was always the Jags. It's always the Jags. It's always the Jags. Always the Jags.
Welcome into Always the Jags, your podcast where we talk about all things Jacksonville, all things Jaguars, all things Duval. Today, I have to release some news. I'm a little bit behind the egg ball on. Most Jaguars fans already know, but in case you didn't, make sure you check out this video because I'm going to talk about why it was a good move. And the Jaguars finally got our GM, Mr. James Gladstone. He is from the Los Angeles Rams. He was in 2016, he was the senior assistant to the general manager, 2018 senior assistant to the general manager, player personnel coordinator, and in 2019, he was the director of scouting strategy. Now, overall, I can't remember exactly who the Jaguars were interviewing in this process, but I, for one, do like this pick. I like this hire. I think James Gladstone has a great track record, and I think he might be able to give us exactly what we need in a GM. Because with the GM, it's two aspects, right? You have draft and you have free agency. And you are, like, while you have scouts and things like that are responsible for the drafts, you're responsible for signing off and saying, okay, this is the guy. Which means when your scouts bring you videos and stuff and say, hey, this is the guy I want us to draft him, you have to look at those videos, do your own research on the guy and be like, okay, yeah, thank you for bringing him. We're going to target him. Right? So you still have to be able to make that judgment call on who to draft. And then free agency, obviously, you got to hand out contracts that are going to help boost your team, as well as make sure that they don't end up dragging your team down in the future. You don't want to, like, Mickey Lomas has been the general manager of the Saints for so long because he continues to bring in players. And even though they're always like millions of dollars over the cap, he just consistently brings them back under. I don't know how, some kind of financial wizardry, but that's how he does it. So with your general manager, those are the two aspects you're responsible for. And so, you know, someone like Howie Roseman, for the past, he's been the general manager of the Eagles, I think for almost 20 years or so. But he's been phenomenal. He's consistently phenomenal in both aspects, even after the Eagles have a down year. He is phenomenal in draft, and he's phenomenal in free agency. He brought in James Bradbury, and he helped the Eagles get to the Super Bowl, and then his play fell off. And then he replaced him with Quinyon Mitchell in the draft, and the Eagles made the Super Bowl again. He's drafted Devonta Smith. He drafted Jalen Hurts. He drafted a lot of those offensive line players, and then the guys he bring in free agency consistently work out. None other than Saquon Barkley. Now, most of us thought it was a slam dunk hit, but again, a lot of GMs, he knew it was such a slam dunk. He offered Saquon Barkley a contract, and I think he signed it on the first day of free agency. So with Howie Roseman, there's never been any hesitancy or anything like that. So when I look at James Gladstone, I think his resume is strongest in drafting. And that's what I like. As the director of drafting scouting strategy, for a GM to be known as good in the draft, you got to be able to do two things. Nail your first round picks, nail them. You can be a great GM who gets guys in the later rounds, but if your first round picks don't pan out, it doesn't really matter because your first round picks are your most valuable picks, right? And like, sure, you can trade those for players and stuff like that, but the best players that end up dominating in the league usually come out in the first round. And so if you're not hitting on your first round picks, if they're not dominating the league, they usually end up becoming busts. And Dave Caldwell, that was his entire problem. He got us some great gems in the later round. Unique Ngakoue, one of them, Telvin Smith, guys like that. But he could not get the first round draft picks right. Every time he did, they ended up, I think only like 2 or 3 ended up staying with us for a long period of time. He was nailing all the other rounds, but you got to nail the first round if you want to stick around as a GM. So James Gladstone, since he's been the director of scouting strategy, which I believe means he answers to the GM when it comes to draft, right? Like if the scouts bring information to him and he brings it to the GM, and he also directs the scouts, hey, here's what I'm looking for and what our team needs. And my guess is that the general manager, Les Snead, just kind of signs off on whatever James Gladstone does and as far as drafting world. And his track record for that is exactly what you want, right? I'm not going to say flawless because nobody is. And the Rams haven't had a lot of first round picks, but he's been with them since 2019, right? And all the first round picks that the Rams have actually been able to pick since they got Stafford have blossomed into defensive player of the year candidates, multiple sacks, multiple, because I think I can't remember who it was last year, but this year, Jared Verse, Offensive Rookie of the Year. Now, again, a lot of people thought he was the best defensive player in the class, right? But he slipped. He slipped past the Colts and a couple other people. Gladstone didn't let that scare him. He was like, Les Snead, you need to go take Jared Verse. And it was like, okay, yeah, thank you. Let's do that. So that's one thing that's going to go in his favor really well, is that he consistently nails his first round picks, but also he finds gems in the later rounds. Like, again, James Gladstone was responsible for Puka Nacua, who is the Rams' leading receiver. He was a fifth rounder, and he, I believe, broke the rookie receiving record, or he came really close to it, right? He also got them Byron Young, who was a fantastic find in the third round. So he showed consistency, and there's a lot of other players on the Rams that are starters that are sixth, fifth round picks that helped them get into the playoffs. So I think he has an excellent track record for the draft. And if I had to choose what I wanted my GM to be stronger in, I would definitely say the draft rather than free agency. It's more important to be good at drafting good players than it is to be signing them. Why? Because when you sign a player, they're almost always in decline, because if a player hits free agency, that means he wasn't good enough for his team to retain him. And sometimes teams just can't afford him. But in general, teams don't let dominating players hit the free agent market. They don't. They franchise tag them and they re-sign them. But you can get solid role players. And I mean, again, no one knows how the Giants let Saquon Barkley hit free agency, but they did. And Howie Roseman snatched him up. So, but when it comes to draft, that's where you find your dominating players, because if you find a dominating player in the draft, you aren't going to let him leave your franchise. Or at least you're not going to let him leave your franchise without multiple first-round picks in exchange, like with Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams, people like that. So that's why, and the Ravens have been so successful for so long, because they know how to draft. Most of their best players come from the draft. Until someone just let them sign Derrick Henry. It's like all the teams that are good at drafting, everyone else in the NFL is just letting them be good at free agency too. It's like you can't let them have both ways, guys. So to me, if I'm going to choose, like, hey, what are you strongest in? I think he can pick up free agency, and I don't think our free agency class is ever going to suffer because of it. And this last free agency class, I don't think you can do much worse than that. I mean, contribution wise, all we got from this last free agent class, I don't think we got anybody that we can, like, we got Darnell Savage, and he really helped out. I didn't think I didn't think he was a bad signing, but I didn't think he was the only one we should make, right? I didn't think he should be our number 2 cornerback because he also gets hurt. Eric Armstead, I thought he was a great addition at defensive tackle. Defensive tackle. For some reason, we've been playing him as defensive end. And now he's saying he wants to go back to defensive tackle. I don't even understand what's happening with that whole storyline. But either way, based upon the production alone, if James Gladstone gets more, like, he has a strong resume for drafting, and Trent Baalke has had some very nice draft hits. He's drafted some guys that I really liked. Walker Little, who I knew was going to be good, and now he's our left tackle, and I'm very happy about that. You know, he got Brian Thomas, and a lot of people say he kind of fell into that. Yeah, you know, whatever. I thought Andre Cisco was going to be better than he ended up being. But Trent Baalke's also had some, you know, questionable moves. Like, we got Trayvon Walker, sure, double-digit sacks, that's great. Who was defensive player of the year in the running? Oh, Aiden Hutchinson. Also, would Aiden Hutchinson be better on the Jaguars playing across from Josh Allen than he would be on the Lions, where he's the best defensive lineman? Would we have a different franchise if we drafted Aiden Hutchinson? I mean, don't tell me it was altruistic and Trent Baalke just really wanted Aiden Hutchinson to go to the hometown kid. So I don't know. You know, looking back, again, Trayvon's better against the run than Aiden. I do feel like that. If we had better defensive tackles, maybe it would be a better match. And we have no idea of knowing whether Aiden would be better in Jacksonville than he would have been in Detroit. But all that being said, that forever is going to be looked at as a miss on Trent Baalke. And then Devin Lloyd. I thought he was going to be great, but he hasn't really gotten there yet. And Foye Lucon's kind of been carrying the whole thing. Now, Foye Lucon was an excellent free agent signing. And Christian Kirk ended up being an excellent free agent signing. I don't think we'd be able to see how good Trevor Lawrence can be if we didn't go get Christian Kirk. And even though we paid him, arguably overpaid him, like I do think it was necessary in order for us to see can Trevor Lawrence be good, because if we were like, no, we're not going to pay for Christian Kirk, and he would have went to the Eagles for like 12 million, and Trevor would have had no weapons. So if Kirk was like, yeah, I'm only coming to Jacksonville if you give me 18 million, it's like, okay, well, that's what we got to do. You know what I mean? So we have to evolve into that franchise where it's like, okay, yeah, we don't have to pay you buckets of money in order to come here. So James Gladstone, I think, is a great choice overall. I think Jaguars fans should be very happy. And like I said, if he brings some of that drafting pedigree that the Rams have, like the Rams have been able to make the playoffs the last 2 years and be consistent, and potentially even move on from Matthew Stafford because they have so many really good young players that are just being drafted, right? And the Rams could stick around for a serious threat for a long time because they got a lot of really good players, really cheap players, and that's why drafting is so important, because if those guys become your starters, they are cheap, and that will help your franchise continue to grow and get success. So, drop your thoughts below. What do you think? Do you think James Gladstone is the best choice for our Jacksonville Jaguars franchise? Do you think he's going to end up being what we need in a GM? And never forget, who was always the Jags.